Hi everybody, and welcome to my Diverseathon wrap-up video. For those of you who don't know, or as a reminder to those of you who watch my TBR, Diverseathon is a readathon in which participants are asked to read diverse books. That's it. There are no other challenges, just try to expand the limits of your comfort zone when it comes to reading by incorporating books about or books by individuals in marginalized groups. This most recent round of Diverseathon, which took place from January 22nd to the 29th of 2017, encouraged readers to dive into Own Voices books. Own Voices books, for those of you who don't know, are books in which characters from marginalized groups are featured and the author is from that same marginalized group. Diverseathon was hosted by four lovely booktubers: Christina Marie, Joss at Squibbles Reads, Monica at She Might Be Monica, and Simon from Savage Reads. If you want more information about Diverseathon or any of the hosts, I will leave links to their channels in the description box. So now let's talk a little bit about my experience in this round of Diverseathon. I set out to read 4 specific books, and I'm happy to say that I got to read all 4 of those books over the course of Diverseathon, and I even got to dive into a 5th one, although I haven't quite finished it yet. I'll talk about that at the end of this video. The first book I read was Akata Witch by Nnedi Okorafor. Akata Witch is set in a magically infused Nigeria. Akata Witch tells the story of Sunny, who is an albino black girl born in America, but who has been transplanted back to her parents' home country of Nigeria. During the course of the book, Sunny awakens to her magical powers and is drawn into a group of friends who also have magical abilities. At the same time that Sunny is awakening to her power, there is a black magician who is going around killing and maiming children. Ultimately, Sunny and her group of friends are the ones who have to confront and stop this evil villain. There's really no escaping the parallels between some of the elements in Akata Witch and in Harry Potter. But I think that these similarities do a service to the target audience for these books, which is middle grade to young adult audience. It gives them a starting point from which they feel comfortable to explore an otherwise alien world to most of that population. I think that Nnedi Okorafor does an excellent job in portraying Nigerian and West African society at a level that middle grade and young adult readers can understand. And she doesn't shy away from approaching topics like sexism and racism in a way that is meant to spark conversation among groups of readers who have all read the same book. The pace of the book was fairly slow, with a large emphasis on character development and world building, which kind of makes sense given that I think Nnedi Okorafor intended for this to be the first book in a series. Luckily for me, the next book in the series, the second book, is meant to come out this year, but that's a staggering 6 years from when the first book was released. Regardless, if you're a Harry Potter fan or you're interested in learning about Nigerian and West African culture, I would strongly encourage you to pick up Akata Witch and give it a try. I'm really looking forward to being able to read the second book in this series, Akata Warrior, which is set to release later in 2017. The next book I read was The Midnight Gardener by R.G. Thomas, and this was an ebook that I read, so I will leave the cover image up somewhere over here for you to view. The Midnight Gardener is a young adult romance novel, and I found it to be a very sweet teenage love story that just happened to be in a fantasy narrative with gnomes, dragons, witches, wizards, and the like. The novel follows Thaddeus, who is a teenage boy who has been moved around by his father a lot to many different towns and is kind of jaded and afraid to make friendships because he knows that he'll never be able to keep friends for longer than a very short time. Thaddeus and his father move into a town called Superstition, and Thaddeus starts to fall for the boy next door who turns out to be a garden gnome named Teofil. Throughout the course of the novel, you get to see this budding relationship between Thaddeus and Teofil grow, and it was very refreshing to see it portrayed as happening in a family environment that was very accepting and open to both boys exploring their sexual orientation and their sexuality. One of the things I really loved about R.G. Thomas's writing was how he portrayed the very visceral feelings that emotions give us. Overall, I enjoyed the book. It wasn't spectacular, but it was a nice diversion. The third book that I read was Monstrous Volume 1, Awakening, written by Marjorie Liu and illustrated by Sana Takeda. Again, I read an electronic copy of this graphic novel, so I'll leave a copy of the cover over here for you to see. I just have to say that this graphic novel is so gorgeous. The art is just simply stunning. The cover art alone was enough to draw me in and make me want to read this book. Monstrous is set in an alternate 1920s Asia in which human society is ruled by a matriarchy. It also involves elder gods, immortal beings, demi-humans, and talking cats, so it really has the right mix to keep my attention. The genre on this one is really hard to pin down. The best I can do is to say it is sort of like a fantasy action-adventure crossed with a psychological thriller. I don't really want to talk about the story in this video because I don't want to give too much away, but I will say that racism, sexism, classism, ableism, and the formation of personal identity are all topics that are deeply explored within the pages of this volume. There's also a lot of gore, so if you're squeamish, I would say steer clear. Otherwise, I would say give Monstrous a chance, even if you're not really into graphic novels. I really think the art and the storytelling will draw you in, regardless of whether you feel you're a graphic novel reader. The final novel that I finished during this round of Diverseathon is We Are the Ants by Sean David Hutchinson. I will be brutally honest with you here. This book absolutely wrecked me. For me, it was a 5-star read from beginning to end, and it's certainly going to be on my best of 2017 list. I have so many thoughts about this book swimming in my head that I simultaneously want to just word vomit, and I am also, in some respects, speechless. For your sake, I'll try to find a middle ground. I'll concede that the premise of the book sounds a little bit cheesy. On the surface, the reader is following Henry, a teenage boy who is leading a life that is slowly falling apart around him, and in the middle of this, he is abducted by aliens and given the option to either save humanity when some sort of disaster is going to strike them in 144 days, or to just let everything end. Underneath that, this is a rich and complex thought piece that just so happens to be wrapped in a YA novel. Hutchinson explores so many ideas in this book, from death to depression to violence to sexuality to sexual violence to love and anger and hope. But the biggest and most widespread exploration of all in this novel is that of memory. How we form memories, how we lose memories, what sort of solace we can take in them, but also how they can continue to bring us pain throughout our lives, and ultimately really how fallible and frail memory is. As you can imagine, the tone of the book overall is quite heavy and the pacing is slow, but Hutchinson manages to interject enough humor and wit and lighthearted moments to really keep you compelled and wanting to read more. Overall, despite its classification as a young adult novel, I think that We Are the Ants has so much to offer readers at any age, and I would encourage wholeheartedly anybody to read these books. With that being said, I will give you a trigger warning that this book does deal with and depict both suicide and sexual assault. So those are the 4 books that I actually completed during Diverseathon. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, I did have the opportunity to start another book right before Diverseathon ended, and that was my first ever arc, Dreadnought by April Daniels, which just recently came out from Diversion Books. Because I got this arc over on NetGalley, it is of course electronic, and I will leave the cover art over here for you to look at. Dreadnought is a middle grade novel that features Danny, who is a transgender girl. Danny lives in a world that is inhabited by capes, people who have superpowers that are either evil or good. And it just so happens that Danny was on site for the death of one of the biggest heroes, Dreadnought, and as he died, he passed his mantle and his powers to Danny. As part of this transfer of power, Danny's body is physically transformed into that of a girl. The rest of the book explores Danny trying to deal with both her physical transformation as well as now having superpowers. I do plan on finishing Dreadnought fairly soon, and after I do, I will have a full review up on my blog. Speaking of my blog, if you would like to hear me speak more eloquently about any of the 4 books that I finished for Diverseathon, check out my blog over the coming weeks, where I will be posting my full reviews of those pieces as well. Overall, I really enjoyed my reading experience during Diverseathon. I am already one who tends to gravitate towards books that offer diverse stories and diverse voices, but I hope that other participants will have the opportunity to incorporate more of those books into their regular reading schedule. On that note, there were 4 books that I found during Diverseathon that I really wanted to read. You can learn a little bit more about them in my February TBR video, which I will link at the end of this video as well as in the description box below. As always, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment box below. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day.